Well, welcome to Walking with Jesus. We are in lesson 41, and we're kind of wrapping up the Sermon on the Mount, getting toward the latter part of it there. We've been going through and enjoying most of us like to think of the greatest sermon ever recorded. You know, I can tell you nights that I've gone to sleep dreaming, if I could preach a sermon that was so perfect, though nobody would turn away from wanting to accept Jesus as their Lord and Savior. How would you do it? How would you go about it? Well, Jesus was the perfect preacher, if there ever was one, and he preached such a beautiful message here, and there were still people that turned and rejected him. So I realized that no matter how great I want to think I am, there are people that are going to not respond to what God has given me to teach. And this is where we have some room for variety. Different people, different styles, different messages, and you reach people that I can't reach, and you reach people that I can't reach, and it all works together, and people get won to Christ. Well, we're talking about the Sermon on the Mount. We're going to talk today about relationships and how to treat other people. So this is our timeline. We are getting down toward the latter part of the second year of Jesus' ministry, and moving right along through there. Here is again our little map. Here's Capernaum, this is the Sea of Galilee, and this is the mountain on which they believe that the Sermon on the Mount was preached. About a mile distance here, maybe, not too far. Right down here is where Jesus said, "Upon this rock I'll build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it." So, at least as best we know. The good news is, if you've been to Israel and you've gone from hither to thither, anywhere in there, you have at least crossed the footsteps of Jesus at least one time, if not maybe several times, or maybe even walked a path along with him. Isn't that encouraging? Well, how do you treat other people? Are you an armchair quarterback? Are you someone who's quick and frequent to criticize someone else's actions, especially after the fact? We're all good at that. We can always look at how we see what someone else is doing, and we can find something that we think should be done differently. I've had people tell me, "Glenn, this is the wrong way to do this Bible study. You should do it this way instead of that way." And there's going to be people that are going to find fault with me. There's going to be people that are going to say, "Hey, this has touched my life and changed my life." We're changing lives in 40 countries around the world right now that are churches, ministers that are using this material. So I'll change the lives of those that God gives me to change, and the rest of them will find another way. But I have had several people try with good intentions to tell me how to run this study. Some have been good ideas, and some are just being critical. And some are just being different. Not necessarily good or bad, but that's their style, and that's great. You know, there's more than one way to go about teaching this, even though this is the way I prefer to teach it right now. We're in Matthew chapter 7, verses 1 through 12, and we're going to be in Luke chapter 6, verses 37 and 38 today also. Jesus is continuing to teach us how to be pleasing to God. And he's going to teach us how God cares about our needs and us, and then he's going to give us the golden rule about how to treat others. So we'll talk about that in just a little bit. Well, here, the first thing is, here come to judge. Matthew chapter 7, 1 and verses 1 and 2, and Luke chapter 6, verses 37 and 38. Do not judge, or you too will be judged. Do not condemn, or you will not be. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over, and will be poured into your lap. For the same way you judge others, you will be judged. And the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Some people have tried to suggest that we should not judge others and cite this verse as their proof. Verse 1. This happens often when we or they want to deny a certain wrong behavior or don't want to confront the wrongdoer with their sin. However, such a statement involves making a judgment. When I tell you don't judge, I'm making a judgment on whether you should judge or not. We cannot live without making judgments about what is right or what is wrong. Somebody goes through and the light just turned red, and you say, "Oh, they ran a red light. Where's the police officer when you need them?" Or you see somebody that's looking down like this while they're driving down the road, and you say, "Where's the police officer when they need them?" Of course, when you're doing it, it's a whole lot different. But when they're doing it, where's the police officer when you need them? We see somebody running through highway and fairways a little fast with their car, and we know they're not following that 18 mile per hour thing, and we say, why doesn't somebody slow them down? We are constantly, you shouldn't eat that, that's not good for your health. All sorts of things we do, making judgments about the life and actions of other people. But sometimes we're smart enough we make them about ourselves too. Now we look at the clouds and we make a judgment about the weather. We hear what a celebrity is doing something wrong and we make a judgment of what they're doing. We sue someone with whom we have agreed. That involves making a judgment that their behavior was harmful and we deserve some sort of consideration because of that harmful behavior. These judgments are sometimes made on the actions of others, but sometimes they are also a reminder to us about our own behavior. We demand that a thief, a killer, or an abuser be thrown into prison and punished. That involves making a judgment. If you read the entire sentence, that's verse 1 and verse 2, Jesus tells us that the same standard that we use to judge others will be used to judge us. The problem is that we often judge others guilty of something that we are likewise guilty of ourselves. Oh, I've never done that. Like I say, it's okay when I do it, it's just wrong when you do it. Not. If it's wrong for someone else to do it, it is wrong for you and me to do it. And we will most assuredly be judged by the same standard we impose on others. So even if we're not judging by God's standards, we're judging by some man's made up standards, we're going to be judged by the standard that we use. That's what Jesus is saying here. If we judge by God's standards, we are fair. If we judge by our standards, they will be used against us sometime in the future. And we can get into the whole what's going on with some of this political stuff that's going on right now and say, wait a minute, it's okay for you to do it, but it's not okay for them to do it? And we can get into all sorts of bantering over judgments that are being made right, wrong, or otherwise. Well, let's talk about some nitpicking hypocrites. Matthew chapter 7, verses 3 through 6, and Luke 6, 39 to 42. He also told them this parable. Can a blind man lead a blind man? Will they not both fall into a pit? A student is not above his teacher, but everyone who is fully trained will be like his teacher. Why do you look at the speck or the sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when you, all the time there's a plank, you yourself fail to see the plank in your own eye? You hypocrite. First take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. Do not give dogs what is sacred, and do not throw your pearls to pigs. If you do, they trample them under their feet, and then they turn and tear you to pieces. So how can you help someone else make his or her life better if you're doing the same thing? A teacher cannot take a student any further than that teacher has achieved in their own life. You can't judge someone else if you're guilty of the same behavior. Years ago, when I started doing software training, I was still learning how to use some of that software myself. The only advantage was, number one, I had a book. Number two, I knew more than most of the students in the class. And so as long as I knew more than the students, I was able to teach them what I knew. Then they went out of the class knowing more than what they knew when they came in. And even here, I have spent much of my life on the life and teachings of Jesus, but I don't know it all. I'm still learning. And there may be some things, there have been some things in our discussion times in class when you brought out things that, I hadn't thought about it that way. And so I'm still learning, even though I've been teaching for a while. You can't judge someone else if you're guilty of the same behavior. Related to the above comments, many of us judge others of things that we do ourselves. It's so easy to see what others are doing and not realize what you're doing. Sometimes we think that by condemning them, we will be less guilty for the things that we are doing. We must always look at ourselves and our actions before we speak against the other person. And you're going to hear me mention that a lot in the Walking with Jesus Bible study. My first priority is to make sure I am living my life in a way that honors God. I had a young person I was trying to get to come to church say, well, I don't want to go to that church. All it is a bunch of hypocrites. And I said, well, where in the world do you think is the best place for a hypocrite to be? At least in church, they're learning about God and they're trying to make their lives better, which is a little more than I can say for those that aren't in church. Yeah, there are things that some people would look at me and go, you're a hypocrite. I'm not trying to be. I don't want to be. I hope you don't find those things out. I hope I live my life in a way that reflects Christ and all that I say and do, but I'm not perfect. And so sometimes we make mistakes. Aren't you glad God is a God of grace and not a God of, oh, I'm going to whoop up on you because you're a hypocrite? We thank God for that. But we want to continually monitor our own behavior before we go worrying about someone else's, so that if we do feel the need or concern and out of love and respect to bring something to their attention and maybe correct them, we're not doing it out of hypocrisy. We're doing it out of love. So how about getting it your way? Matthew chapter 7, verses 1 through 11, or 7 through 11. Ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be open to you. For everyone who asks receives, and he who seeks finds. And to him who knocks, the door will be open. So which of you, if a son asks for bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, will give him a snake? If you then, though you are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good gifts to those who ask him? Most parents work hard to provide for the basic needs of their children. Most parents. They give them a home, they give them food, they give them clothing, they give them protection. Many will also try to provide little extras, little toys and other things that children may say they want. Do you ever remember when you were a child? Can you remember that far back? Was there ever something that you went to mommy and to daddy and you went into the store and said, oh, I want this, and maybe they got it for you, and as soon as you got it, you didn't care about it anymore? And I've seen that. I've seen that with my boys. I saw that with our grandchildren. I've seen that with our great-grandchildren. They say they want it in the moment because that's the way we are. And you know what? We adults are still the same way. I can take a look at things. I've got a list of things that, oh, I want this, I want this. And I got to looking back at a couple of those things on that list. You know what? I don't really want it all that bad. Fortunately, I didn't want it before I got it, so I didn't get it in the second place. But sometimes our intentions are good. And as parents, our intentions are good. We do this because we love our children. We want to please them as much as we possibly can. Now, sometimes we think that buying them little things will show our love. I'm going to pick on my wife for a minute. She loves to bribe the great-granddaughters. Usually she does it with fruit and vegetables. And they love it. They love Grandma giving them fruit and vegetables. And occasionally it's been sugary stuff, but less of that and more of the other natural stuff. I'm a hard nose. I don't want to give them anything. I want to make them obey. But they enjoy our company, and they like excuses to come over to Grandpa and Grandma's house. And we're trying to do what we can to teach them about Jesus. And hopefully they'll grow up deciding they need to walk with Jesus in their lives. The older two have said they want to follow Jesus and be baptized. So we're going to talk to them a little more about that, and may have reason to celebrate that for too much longer. Children want us much more than the stuff that we could ever buy them. One of the things that I've come to realize, and I wish I had realized this 40 years ago, or 30 years ago, I kind of knew it then, but I didn't know it enough. None of us parents are perfect, are we? Frustrating. But children would rather have our time more than anything else we would buy them. They'd rather hang out with us or have us hang out with them and participate in things that they're interested in. We expose them to things we're interested in. So that's a very important. God the Father is much the same way. When we ask for something, he's not going to be cruel or unkind to us. He's not going to allow us to have things that will harm us. But God leads the way in having a loving relationship with us. And so we want to look to that loving relationship, see how he handles us. Maybe it'll give us a few little thoughts about how we relate to each other and to family members and others around us. He always has time for you, no matter how busy you may be. He's there to listen and care. Now, I know you've been through a crisis at one time or another in your life. Probably been times you just cried yourself to sleep, or you were just so distraught that who knows what. Unfortunately, that's a part of life. The good news is that God has always been there. He always loves you. He always cares. And even though you may be hurting over this situation, God has not abandoned you. He knows what you're going through. Well, we got one more, and that's the golden rule. So he says, and everything do to others what you would have them do to you, for this sums up the law and the prophets. Later on, we're going to talk about the great commandments. The great commandments are really easy. There's only two of them. Love God, love people. And if you think about loving people, that sums up loving God and loving people sums up everything that the Old Testament is trying to teach us. Well, the golden rule is that we treat others the way we should prefer that they treat us. Some people think the golden rule is he who has the most gold rules. And again, we're kind of seeing this with all the political stuff going on. I've got so much gold I can buy my way into office and I can rule. Well, we'll see if that works or if it doesn't work. But it appears sometimes that a lot of people think that they can operate on that principle. But actually the golden rule is to treat others the way you would want to be treated. Not the way you perceive they are treating you, but the way you would really want them to treat you. This rule also implies that we treat them first, regardless of whether they treat us the same way or not. It also means that we do not treat them the way we think they treated us. So I think you've been unkind to me. I'm not going to be unkind to you. That's not the golden rule. I'm going to be kind to you in spite of how I feel you have treated me. I observed years ago, I'll give you an example. I made a comment that offended a member of the church. I wasn't aware of it at the time. I was told later on. Back at that time, I was putting out a monthly newsletter, and so in the next article in the monthly newsletter, I just wrote a general, hey, if I said something that offended you, I apologize, I'm sorry, I did not intend to offend. Will you please forgive me? And I think the situation blew over, life went on, and everything was fine. But I've observed, somebody may make a comment. Now, they may have meant that comment to compliment you, but for some reason it just came across the wrong way and you got offended at it. Or maybe they meant the comment to insult you and you decided not to get offended by it. I remember a comment I made to my wife when we were still dating, and I thought, ooh, she laughed it off. And so we've got this little understanding of each other, and we call it humorous. My little comment that she makes about me is I'm the absent-minded professor. That means that I profess to be absent-minded. Doesn't really get me out of trouble when I forget something, but I try. So sometimes it's not what it said, and it's not how it's said or why it's said, it's how you choose to perceive it. And so if they meant to pick a fight with you and you don't pick back or respond back, there's no fight. If they didn't mean to pick a fight with you, but were just sharing a comment and you take offense out of it, all of a sudden you've got a conflict where you did not need to have one. There's a difference there. So that'll give us some things to think about in our relationships with one another. Can we take constructive criticism? Or are we going to get offended and get hurt by it? No? Some things may hurt. You may need to take some time. I've had comments made. I had to go home and reflect on this. Well, now, is this true and accurate? And is this something that I need to change in my life? And it's helped me to make some changes. When we were talking about preacher stew last night, we had beef stew at our Wednesday night Bible study. And the preacher's wife made it, so I called it preacher stew. Back when I had board meetings, at a church in California that I was serving, The last item on the board agenda was, I called it Preacher Stew. And this was an opportunity for them, if they had seen something that I had said or had done or was doing that wasn't above board or maybe in the best interest of everybody, they could bring it to my attention and I could go home and evaluate it and see maybe I need to make an adjustment here in my behavior. There was a lot of times I went home with my feelings hurt. Fortunately, a good night's rest, a little time to reflect on it. The next day I went back to work. I did not resign. But we want to consider when we're talking with each other, with your spouse. You ever notice if you've gone on a long trip or you've been out shopping all day long, the two of you, sometimes on the way home or sometimes after you get home, you get into a cranky with each other? I noticed that many years ago. And so sometimes I will relate, well, we're tired now and we need to be careful, or I'll say it to myself. Sometimes I'll say it out loud. We need to be careful how we talk to each other because we're tired and cranky. We don't want to get into a little stupid argument over stupid things because we're tired and cranky and stupid. Accusing the other person of being stupid. So the golden rule, would you want them to take everything you say and be offended by it? Or maybe you need to think about not letting that offend you. Now, that requires that you have a healthy love and respect for yourself. If you don't respect yourself, it's harder for you to respect others. You want to love yourself, not in an egotistical, self-righteous way, but in a healthy sort of God loves me, God is using me in my talents to do good things for His kingdom and to be a witness for Him, and I need to accept that in myself and love me for that because that's how God loves me. And not be critical and judgmental of other people or not be offended if somebody else is critical or judgmental of you. The golden rule requires that we think about how we are treating others. Wait a minute. That requires making judgments, doesn't it? Go right back there to verses 1 and 2. Am I showing Christ's love in the way I talk, in the way I judge, in the way that I treat others around me? We'll constantly be working on that. Well, look at this. Here's a picture of this is the church on the Sermon on the Mount. Built on the side of the Sermon on the Mount. Very beautiful structure. You go inside, it is built by the Catholic Church. So if you've ever been in a Catholic church, you know a lot of times they tend to do things really, really super nice. Gold and pearls and marble and all that beautiful stuff. So that's on Capernaum would be off this way. That's looking almost straight north from where I took that picture. I think I was out on the Sea of Galilee in a boat. Long telephoto zoom lens on my camera. Well, how much better can you make and I make this world just by giving and teaching these simple principles in our relationships? How is what you have learned in this lesson going to change your life? We'll talk about that in just a little bit. Next week, Jesus is going to warn us about some serious dangers that we need to be aware of. Your spiritual life is at stake and you will not want to miss this. Right now we're going to stop and we're going to break into our little discussion time and have some discussion questions.